This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. Tripp, as we are now just days away from the Big Ten title game being played between number 1 Oregon, number 3 Penn State. But before we get to that game, we have so much to get into. National Signing Day has come and gone. We have some interesting moves, both personnel and coaching-wise, as well as some interesting rumors. We have so much to break down in this edition. Thank you for joining us here. And Tripp, thank you for joining us live from Columbus, Ohio. What is the feeling like around town a few days after still? I'm sure that Michigan loss is still stinging.
Yeah, I didn't get into town until about 9 o'clock last night, but I need to go grab some food, so went for tacos at Condado Tacos. Have you had Condado Tacos where you can customize your tacos?
I'm not that cultured, so I've never even heard of Condado Tacos.
Condado.
Condado.
See,
there you go. See?
But
I don't leave my house.
Yeah, get in the Uber, and the Uber driver, we're talking about football in the back seat, and he goes, how about that game? Man, I don't know what we're going to do now. I can't believe Ryan Day is still here. So I don't think they're over it yet here in Columbus, Ohio. But I'm here with the Penn State hockey team because that's my other job, not just full-time Still Enrolled podcast host. And then I'll drive from here on Friday night, games tonight and Friday. I'll drive from here Friday night, 2.5 hours to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game on Saturday.
I love when Kirk Herbstreit always kind of every week posts his travel schedule where Thursday night football, then maybe Friday he's at home, and then Saturday game day. And if he's calling a game that's not a game day, he's traveling more. I think we need to do that with you. You were at Penn. You were hosting Penn State National Signing Day on Wednesday. Now you're in Columbus, Ohio, Thursday, Friday. You're going to the Big Ten title game on Saturday. I think we need a Brian Tripp travel schedule alert to where all these places you are going. And unlike Kirk, you're driving. You're a real man's man here.
Well, I think, if Kirk only had to go 2.5 hours as well, I'm not sure if he would hop in the car to go from Columbus to Indy or not. I'm living a charmed life. My biggest problem that I have is ordering my lunch online for delivery here at the hotel for when we're done recording the podcast. I went with Piata. It's an Italian street food. I ended up going with one of the wraps. Crispy chicken in that, a couple other customized things that I put in there, but I went with Piata for lunch. And no, these aren't just plugs, Condado Taco and Piata, for sponsorship of the Still Enrolled podcast.
Wow, you are very cultured. So we don't want to keep that lunch waiting.
You got to sit and experience me trying to figure out how to order online from this place.
I'll give you credit. I would have lost my cool just with frustration where you're trying to order, your delivery address is not showing up or not allowed. You call the place and they say nothing we can do.
But you're in New York City, so you have a variety of options. In Columbus, I have a lot of options, but I'm at a hotel, so I'm trying to figure out what the address is, what the zip code is. How do they just drop it at the front desk if we're still talking here on the podcast? Like this whole thing is timed out perfectly where the second we're done recording, I should be able to go get my chow.
Wow. Okay. So let's not leave the delivery driver waiting any longer here. Let's dive into what we got. I'll tell you, you're living a charmed life right now in Columbus. Lincoln Riley, we thought was living a charmed life at USC. Tripp. So far, the results on the field have not gone the way we thought. And even recruiting-wise, it's an up and down day yesterday for USC and Lincoln Riley. But the big headline coming out of USC and National Signing Day was not about who they signed and who they lost, but instead maybe the future of their head coach. The Athletic drops a report on Wednesday that UCF has reached out to contact Lincoln Riley to see if he'd be interested at all at filling their head coaching vacancy. We actually have Lincoln Riley here at his press conference yesterday on National Signing Day having to answer questions about his future. He was asked about that UCF coaching report. Here's what Lincoln Riley had to say about it.
I tell him I'm a USC Trojan. I'm at the place I want to be, so it's a non-starter, it's a non-issue. I'm home. I tell him I'm a USC Trojan, and I'm at
Tripp. He says his USC Trojan is home. Do you buy that? Like when you see this report, what goes through your mind initially here?
Well, number one, it is if Lincoln Riley is seeking potential outs and other opportunities, knowing that there's, next year, his seat is incredibly hot. at USC. Paul Feinbaum had some really strong comments about Lincoln Riley earlier this week, saying, how is he still employed there at USC? But, the second thought I have immediately is, okay, UCF reached out to Lincoln Riley. Did they reach out to Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and James Franklin and Dan Lanning? Did they reach out to Dabo too? Like, just because they reached out to someone doesn't mean there's mutual interest there. So yes, I could see it as a viable option. I think it does make some sense. Like, if you look at what Scott Frost was able to do and build that program, the offense, the talent, and it certainly doesn't have the pressure of a USC, but it does make a little bit of sense. Like, I don't see it, but it does make a little sense.
Now, it seems like, right, Lincoln Riley is not going to take the job. Yeah. The report by The Athletic said he's never reached back out, so maybe it was a one-sided reach out and there's no pinging back. You heard we just played you what Lincoln Riley said in terms of he's home, he loves USC, he's not leaving. For me, Tripp, when I see this, I can't envision him as a USC head coach beyond 2025. Like, I think it feels like next year is last year. In part, like what you said, who did UCF reach out to? By all accounts, all we know right now is that they reached out to Lincoln Riley. Did they reach out to Kirby Smart? Doesn't sound like it. At least we haven't heard about it. James Franklin, like any of those coaches, why Lincoln Riley? Like, if they're targeting big name coaches that maybe they think are somewhat realistic, why are they picking Riley? Is because all of a sudden they see cracks in the foundation and say, maybe it's gettable? To me, there's a lot of smoke here. And while he's not leaving now, right, he's going to be USC's head coach in 2025. I feel like, honestly, on both sides, maybe they're looking for an exit, and maybe this would not be the worst thing in the world if we're talking about this time next year, Lincoln Riley jumping ship and going somewhere out, name a place, maybe somewhere back in the Big 12 where he's comfortable and familiar with. I don't like, from USC's perspective, they can't fire him right with his gigantic buyout, but both the AD and the president that hired him at USC are no longer there. The program is backsliding. Recruiting is not anywhere near what they thought it would be.
Hold on. They had a top 15 recruiting class. They still have a 5-star quarterback coming in. I know Miller Moss entered the transfer portal this week, but he's not a part of their future plans. And look at the improvement they had on defense last year. And if you look at metrics, I think ESPN's FPI still has USC as a top 25 team. They lost games at the end, brutal losses. And I think a lot of that can be pinned on the head coach. And that's back-to-back seasons where they were competitive, but just didn't. And you're judged on wins and losses, not how competitive you are. But I don't think it's that far of a leap to say USC wins those games, figures it out, figures out their quarterback situation next year with what they improved on defensively. They have talent. They have a ton of talent. I don't think it's not like this is a bare cupboard situation that you encounter at other programs.
It is 13th. To your point, they're 4th in the Big Ten, only behind Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan. They were able to land Jakeem Stewart, who's a huge 5-star recruit they got out of Louisiana on the defensive line. So they at least got the trenches better. But also, we've seen some decommitments. They lost 3 5-star recruits since June. They've lost 2 other top 100 players. And like Tripp, I think it is concerning, right? If you're USC with all that talent in your backyard, when you look at Alabama's recruiting class, they have more guys from Southern California than USC does. He's not winning the territory. And part of that is by design. It's like he's trying and he's losing. Part of the design of Lincoln Riley trying to recruit is national. He wants to get the best players from everywhere, hence getting Stewart from Louisiana, not being afraid to go into SEC territory. And it's a big win for USC. But it's like, let me ask you, when he was hired back in 2022, are you thinking you're going to get a top 15 recruiting class? You're thinking more top 5, top 7 to be with some of the big dogs. I think that's where some of the recruiting disappointment, for at least me, lands.
I know I hosted a national signing day stream yesterday, but I think, if you're in the ballpark and it's all projections. Like, ultimately, yes, you do want to have as many 4- and 5-star prospects as possible because they probably have the most projectable talent to the next level. But if you're saying they're not top 10 because they're 13th, like, I don't read a ton into that. I honestly, this is gonna sound awful because I know we're trying to have an enlightened discussion here on the podcast. I honestly don't care.
I mean, fine. Because it is projection. We've seen a million 5-star recruits at all positions flop and 3 stars come into nowhere and be studs. Like, I get it. And now the transfer portal, it's easier to lose talent, easier to gain talent. Fine. But at least still, I think you could still look at recruiting rankings and National Signing Day at least as a barometer of belief in the program. And I think when you look at a lot of Southern, like guys in your own backyard leaving town, I just don't think it's the best look for USC. And then again, to have these rumors now popping up on National Signing Day of Lincoln Riley, or at least UCF's interest in Lincoln Riley, to me, Tripp, when you look at this entire situation where the backslide in the records on the field, now reported interest, I don't think he's long for the job at this point. And we already saw him leave Oklahoma, right? Once you could say it was an upgrade to go from Oklahoma to USC. But now I wonder, because there was rumors, and again, never substantiated, right? But there was at least a thought of Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma in part because Oklahoma was going to the SEC. And at the time, USC was staying in the Pac-12. And there's a thought maybe Riley didn't want to go into that conference where it's an absolute gauntlet. Well, now little did he know when he signed with USC that they're actually now going to go to the Big Ten and equally, right? Big Ten SEC 1 and 1A. He's in an equally brutal conference. He had a lot of success in the Big 12. They run similar styles of offense the way he wants to. I wonder if stylistically we talked about this when the teams came in, you have to sort of change how you try to win games in the Big Ten compared to the Pac-12. I wonder, and we've talked about his stubbornness in terms of going with what's working and just shining the run game, even when it's successful, to kind of keep throwing the ball. I wonder if he's at a point now where he goes, I'm going to win my way. The Big 12 still is kind of more of an open conference. I'm looking at jobs there, maybe not UCF, but maybe a little bit of a better opening to where I can come in, go back in and run my offense the way I want and still win a ton of games because I can't win games the way I can now.
But you, me, everyone, who thought USC was going to be a top 10 team this year after losing Caleb Williams? Nobody. With the defense they had, they jumped about 70 spots in the defense ratings from last year to this year. That is a marked improvement. We're measuring USC against what we expect a Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush USC team to be. No one thought this year's USC team was going to be all that good until they beat LSU, and then all of a sudden they're up in the top 10, top 15, and this is one of the best. No one think of where the conversation was with USC at the beginning of the year. I'm not saying their record at the end of the year, 500 record, isn't disappointing for USC. But this wasn't supposed to be a 12-0, 11-1, even a 10-2 USC team. This was supposed to be a 9 or 8 win USC team. So I think it's pump the brakes here. I think it's certainly Lincoln Riley is on the hot seat next year. But I think just because there's a rumor out there that a school has interest, that does not mean that interest is mutual. He shut it down right away. As you said, where there's smoke, there can be fire. But I'm not reading any more in to this report with Lincoln Riley.
So let me wrap up then with this. Confidence level 1 through 10 that this time next year, Lincoln Riley is still USC's head coach going to 2026. 1 being the lowest confidence, 10 being the highest confidence. Where would you say your confidence meter is at this time next year? Lincoln Riley is still there.
7.
Okay. I would say 4. In part because I think he needs a big year next year.
Well, I think it's crazy. We went from probably 18 months ago thinking Lincoln Riley's going to parlay the USC job into the NFL. And now he's going to parlay the USC job going back down into a non-major.
Into UCF?
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Maybe he can put up a national title banner and have a parade around Orlando if they win the Big 12.
Yeah, you talked about their recruiting ranking 13th. We're going to do a full recruiting show at some point next week, but notable recruiting rankings from the Big 10. Oregon 4, Ohio State 5, Michigan 7, USC 13, Penn State 17, and Nebraska had a good class, ranked 21st for Matt Rule. Wisconsin 24. It didn't really lose a ton on signing day, which was big for them, especially with all the drama going on around their program. Maryland 27th, Rutgers 31st, Iowa 39th, Illinois 43, Indiana 45, and UCLA 50. But we're going to do a full recruiting show next week. But you'd look at it, right? Then you always talk about Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State in the Big Ten. But now with Oregon and USC, you really feel like there's 5 consistent programs that can land top 10 recruiting classes, but Oregon having the highest rated Big Ten recruiting class. They're 12-0. They're the number one team in the country. They've been probably the unquestioned top team in the country for at least the last 2-3 months. And are they we always talk about Ohio State in the Big Ten. Now it feels like you're talking about Oregon, maybe in that same breath as Ohio State, as the elite team, but we're talking Oregon right now in the Big Ten with all the momentum that Dan Lanning has going in Eugene.
And it does feel like they are now the team to beat, right? Everyone's looking up at the Ducks, where Ohio State has questions, right? Coming after or off of that Michigan loss, also losing to Oregon. And you look at where this Ducks team is, it's not just like a one-year wonder, right? We saw last year with Washington, let's say, where they had all that senior talent go to the national title game, but obviously Kalen DeBoer leaves, they all scatter, and Washington kind of gets knocked down. This feels very sustainable. They have already talent waiting in the wings, and they had a great recruiting day, like you just mentioned, the 4th overall class, the number 1 class in the Big Ten, even able to rip some recruits away from Ohio State, win that straight-up recruiting battle for a guy like Naeem Offord, number 1 defensive back, number 1 defensive player in the country. Oregon is able to get him away from Columbus yesterday. Momentum-wise, Trip, obviously their success this year, projected success in the playoff, future, when you look out again at their roster the next 3 or 4 years, it feels like the Big Ten right now runs through Oregon. What are your thoughts on that?
Can you just say playoff again? You sound a little bit like Jim. I know you're a Colts guy.
Wait, really? Playoff?
You sounded a playoff? Playoff?
I do have a high-pitched voice, so maybe the A was
a little bit like him. You sounded a little bit like him. I think the Big Ten, it still runs through Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State. I think Penn State's trying to crack in, and they may, right? They may do it this Saturday to show that
absolutely could.
That's the one thing that's kind of been missing with Penn State since 2016 is one of those wins over the elite programs. You know, they're one win away from not only winning the Big Ten championship, but I think changing that narrative on James Franklin and the program and being ranked the number 1 team in the country. And then all of a sudden, I think we're having that same conversation with them, and they belong in that group too. But I think Oregon, yes, the answer yes. I probably, without all the rambling, because of the resources they have, Phil Knight, and everything that they have going. I mean, ultimately, Dan Lanning right now is working with an open checkbook, and they have outstanding facilities, an outstanding fan base. They have tradition, they have history, and they have, currently the number 1 team in the country, and they're ultimately successful, so successful. He may be the number 1 head coach in college. Like he's got a star aura around him. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Ducks are establishing themselves as the team to win the Big Ten. You're gonna have to go through Oregon.
I was going to ask you, I don't know how you feel. I would say Kirby Smart right now is still the best coach in college football. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, most sustained success. Since Nick Saban retired, Kirby Smart would be number 1.
And you look at, the only other coach currently right now coaching to win a national title is Dabo Swinney. Clemson's on the decline.
But I think, 6 months ago, Kalen DeBoer is in that discussion. It can change so quickly. I think there's a group of elite coaches. I'm even going to put Ryan Day in that category. Dan Lanning has all momentum right now, but until they win in the postseason too, right? He still has to prove it, and ultimately you're judged on your success in the college football play. That's why Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, the national championships, that's what's made them the cream of the crop and the elite coaches. Dabo, obviously, I don't think he's embraced, and that's the kind of the knock on him. He hasn't embraced modern college football. They're probably the leaders in the clubhouse, but you might be talking about Lincoln Riley in this conversation. Where's Steve Sarkisian fit in? Where's James Franklin fit into this conversation? James Franklin beats Dan Lanning on Saturday, and all of a sudden, is this finally his breakthrough moment at Penn State? Certainly one of the top 10 coaches. They're all part of that pack. Marcus Freeman, part of that pack of top 10 coaches in college football. But yeah, I think right now, if you're starting a program, if you were assembling an NCAA football video game program, and you could pick your head coach, Kirby Smart, Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, James, they're all on that list, but Dan Lanning's right near the top.
He is. And like you said, if he's able to take care of business, it might be Kirby 1 and one of his underlings too there, Dan Lanning.
Bro, like last year, if we're having this conversation, you're talking about Mike Norvell and Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah, no, you're right. It changes quick. I completely agree about that. Yeah, it's a crazy landscape, but also I think it makes it exciting because there's so much unpredictability that, really keeps us guessing every single year. Speaking of which, I want to play a game with you really fast here. Just a few quick hitters. Speaking of the unpredictability, depending on how this weekend goes, we have a chance trip for all four Power 4 conference championships, including the Big Ten, to be won by newbies: Oregon, Arizona State, SMU, Texas. Would you say that's a big deal, little deal, or no deal that 4 newcomers to 4 big-time conferences could be the reigning champions in all 4?
I think it's a big deal, not only because of what it means for the current landscape of college football, but for those programs to enter a conference and you have no familiarity with your opponents, where an Ohio State has familiarity with all of its opponents, but 2, Penn State had familiarity with all of its, they're going to play all 4 of them. But to have that familiarity and to have to overcome that, I think that makes it even that much more impressive for all of these teams joining these established conferences. And one of our discussions right at the top of the year on the podcast was, well, how do these West Coast teams fit in with their kind of that speed, finesse versus the power of the Big Ten? Oregon as a tremendous example. I think they're built for success in the Big Ten because they're also a physical football team. They're really good in the trenches. They're good up front. They're good on the offensive line, particularly at the tackle spot. I think they got 2 of the best defensive ends in the Big Ten as well. But if you can do it that way, like they molded their identity to really work in the Big Ten. I think Washington, USC, and UCLA still have some catching up to do. But Texas plays a brand of football the same way that fits really well in the SEC. So yeah, I think it's a big deal.
I agree. I think it highlights to the parity of just like the dominance that we once saw really rule over college football for decades, centuries, maybe, where there's only 2, 3, 4 teams at the top and everyone else, there's a clear line below them. Now it's wide open. Or like Texas can walk right into the big bad SEC and win, and Oregon, same thing.
Yeah, but if we're in Norman, we're having a different discussion.
Well, yes. No, it's and that's why. But I think it's a big deal because it highlights some programs are ready and others are not. That's fair and right. UCLA, USC, different discussion compared to the change. But credit to Oregon, credit to Texas, at least for those programs, as well in terms of being able to adapt. What about? Well, let's just actually stick with Oregon here for 1 second. I'm a big uniform guy, Chip. I don't know how you feel. Yep. But we got the uniform reveal for the Big Ten title game on Saturday night. I want to show you first what it could have been and then what it is. Yeah. This is what the uniforms could have been. If you're watching on YouTube, you see it. If you're listening to us on our podcast feed, number 1, thank you. Number 2, I'll explain it to you. It's that neon green, old traditional look for Oregon with the yellow pants and the yellow helmet. They wore that throwback look a ton this year at home. This is what it could have been, a traditional, maybe 90s throwback uniform matchup. Oregon has released, Penn State's wearing white for this game, so that doesn't change. But Oregon released their uniforms for Saturday, and this is what they are, Trip. Black tops, black bottoms with like that metal they used to have like in the early 2000s on the shoulders. I don't know what you would call that. And green helmets with the O. Is this a big deal, little deal, no deal in your opinion that what we could have was a great throwback uniform matchup? And instead, we get a little bit of Oregon where I think they may have swung and missed on this one.
I think in college football, in big games, when Michigan plays Ohio State, I want to see them wearing their colors. Like a couple of years, Ohio State's kind of brought out the all reds for a big game, all black, all gray. That's fine as a gimmick, but and maybe this is just the team that I work for talking, but when I put on a game, I should be able to look at the game and know immediately who that is based on their uniform. And for a big game, I want to see the tradition. I would love that old Rose Bowl feel from this game. Penn State-Oregon playing for the first time since that Rose Bowl.
True.
I would love to see that, but I actually, Oregon's so innovative. I think when you see a crazy uniform, you kind of think Oregon. I think the all black versus the white, plus you still got the green helmet. I think it's going to be I think it's a good look. I think it's a good look. Yeah, I'd rather have the throwback Oregon that you had on the screen, but I still think it's a pretty good look.
I'm all for alternates if they're nice. I think, look, Oregon, this is what they do. I just think in terms of when you look at what they have and what they've worn this year versus this uniform combo, it's fine. It's okay. I don't think there's much creativity behind it. I would have loved, I'm a sucker for old school. And I think, again, it's so many for all teams, by the way, not just Oregon in college football and the NFL. So many teams, the better look is always the traditional throwback versus new and innovative. Go with what works. That's all that I'm saying here. And again, I care more maybe than I definitely care more than I should, but I think it's a big miss there by Oregon. Last thing about the Big Ten title game before we preview it a little later on. Tickets trip for Indy for this game are very low. Last time I checked this morning on StubHub, at least free plug for them, $17. So not exactly a huge get-in price to watch two top 3 teams battle it out. Is that a big deal at all in your opinion that the ticket prices and the demand right now for this game is not very high?
I think it's the current nature of college football. Look, if this is in Chicago where Penn State has a little bit bigger alumni base, I'm not sure where Oregon's biggest alumni bases even land. Outside of Seattle and Portland and probably San Francisco, West Coast. It's Indianapolis, not a huge city to begin with. A great host city. I think Lucas Oil Stadium's unbelievable. But to get to Indy for Penn State from State College, it's an 8.5-hour ride. And for Penn State fans, whether they're in New York, Philly, the DMV, and to get there from, and that's last minute, right? No one expected to be in it if you're Penn State fans. No one expected to be playing because there was a shocking upset. And Columbus is a 2.5-hour drive. So if Ohio State's in it, we might not be having this discussion. Certainly very difficult to get to from Eugene, Oregon, and from the West Coast. Cost, you have to balance. Are you going to spend money to go to this? Or are you going to spend money for your home playoff game? Not everyone has an unlimited budget. And maybe you want to allot for the quarterfinals or the semifinals or hoping for the national championship. I think that's what you're going to see across the board in college football at these conference championship games, unless it's a game that you have to win to get into the playoffs. I still think the championship games are really important. I think winning a title is important. We talked about that on Monday. Not going to go over that again. I think to get a bye is important. But if you're a fan, you have a decision to make now. When it's not in close proximity and it's not in a big base, it's not in New York City, it's not in Chicago. How do you get there? How much are you going to spend? And is it worth just waiting because you're hoping, right? It's a little bit of a risk. You're hoping there are bigger games down the road.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a little deal. I don't think it's no deal, but this is kind of what we signed up for, that these conference championship games are being held right now for TV ratings and to crown a conference champion, but ultimately should have very little impact on the college football playoff.
And that's why I think it's like no deal. Like I see the prices. I don't think it matters in part because like you said, like if you're Oregon, you're traveling, like even look at the semifinal games. If Oregon wins, let's say, and you're a Duck fan trying to save up for a playoff game, well, you could be in the Rose Bowl, right? Which is obviously it's the closest trip you have, or the Fiesta Bowl. Other than that, any other bowl game Oregon is in, you're in Florida, you're in Georgia, you're in Dallas, all very far, very expensive to get to from Eugene or that surrounding area. I think it makes more sense if you're going to go to, let's say, one game. I would, at least I'll speak for myself here as a Penn State fan and alum. Like, I'm not going on Saturday. I really had no thought about going, to be honest with you. I'd much rather save my money to go to a home playoff game in State College, or maybe even travel for a semifinal game if they win and get a bye. I'd much rather spend money for a game. I don't want to say, again, that's meaningful. That's unfair to say it's meaningful, but it is a life or death game versus if Penn State wins or loses, Oregon wins or loses, they're still in the playoff and they're still probably hosting a home game and have everything in front of them. You could argue even the path of losing is better than the path winning. So I just think it's like, just with how much money is being spent now on these multiple postseason games, I can't fault anyone for saying, I'm going to pass and just watch this game on TV at all. Last thing here, in terms of big deal, little deal, no deal. Cade McNamara this week announced he is transferring from Iowa, another quarterback that goes to the Hawkeyes to try to get something going. Could not. From Iowa's perspective, losing Cade here, Trip, is this a big deal, little deal, or just no deal for you?
No deal.
I wish I had something to add. I would agree. Yeah, I don't think you're losing sleep over this if you're Iowa. I don't think it's also exactly the most shocking bit of news as well.
Going to go play his 7th season of college football somewhere else?
Did you see Alan Bowman of Oklahoma State just was awarded his 8th year of eligibility? You want to hear something hilarious? He was in the same recruiting class as Trevor Lawrence. How insane is that?
Yeah, that's insane.
And I guess also Justin Fields too, right?
Yep.
So Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Alan Bowman, all in the same recruiting class. 3 quarterbacks with definitely 3 different paths, to say the least here. How about Michigan, Trip? Here's maybe a big deal.
Yeah.
They have fired their offense coordinator, Kirk Campbell, after just an absolutely horrific offensive output this season, which they were 112th nationally in scoring offense, 129th in passing offense, and they're only one of 5 Power 4 programs to average under 300 yards per game. Now, it's funny timing-wise. They beat Ohio State and then fired their OC. But again, at this point, Trip, I don't think it's shocking to say the least. But I think it's, if you're Sherrone Moore, this is the move you got to make. Urgency is now. You got Bryce Underwood there. I think there's, an anticipation to win right away. You can't take any more risks. I respect Sherrone Moore's decision here to move quickly off of Kirk Campbell and try to get a real fix offensively in Ann Arbor.
I don't think Kirk Campbell was the problem. They didn't have a quarterback this year. And I don't, it almost feels personal because Kirk Campbell, if you look at the post he had yesterday on social media, there are pictures of Jim Harbaugh, pictures of his family. Great comment. All the Michigan fans saying, "We wish you well. You helped us win a national championship." No pictures of Sherrone Moore and Kirk Campbell in that post. He was an analyst at Penn State. He was an analyst from Penn State in 2017 through 2019, then became Ricky Ronnie's offensive coordinator at Old Dominion 2020, 2021, then went to Michigan and quickly ascended analyst to QB coach, where him and JJ McCarthy were really close. And JJ McCarthy looked like he was on track to be a terrific pro this year before he was injured, and was the quarterback of a national championship winning Michigan team, albeit some may say, well, look how they got there. They did it with the running game. I don't think JJ McCarthy got enough respect. And I do think that if they had to, when they had to, they just didn't trail last year. But when they had to, he made big plays for them. And I think Kirk Campbell deserves a lot of credit for his development, and then ascended to that offensive coordinator position this past year. I think it feels personal. I don't think Kirk Campbell is the problem. I think he was dealt a bad deck of cards here. And, maybe Sherrone Moore feels like to get what he wants offensively, he has to go in a different direction than Kirk Campbell. But I don't think it's an indictment on him as a coach.
Would you want to see Sherrone Moore take over play calling? He did it last year. Now, again, interim basis, right, in the 6-game absence for Jim Harbaugh beginning end of the year. He won at Penn State, beat Ohio State. He was innovative. If I'm Michigan, I wouldn't, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like Sherrone Moore is interested. He wants more of that CEO role, but after 1 year and having now Bryce Underwood under your wing, I wouldn't hate if I was a Michigan fan seeing Sherrone Moore take the reins, maybe hire an offensive coordinator to help you out, but seeing him as a play caller on Saturday, what do you think about that?
I think it's a tough balance to be a play caller and a head coach at the college football level, and the game planning and scheming with everything you have to deal with now with these athletes, from academics to NIL and recruiting. I think it's a very, very difficult task to ask.
We have seen guys like Ryan Day, right, give it up for Chip Kelly. So maybe you're right about that. So if that's the case, then you're going to hire an offensive coordinator to call plays. M Live provided 3 names I want to run by you here, Chip, to see if any of these kind of tickle your fancy at all. Dan Mullen, current analyst at ESPN, did work in the past with Alex Smith, Tim Tebow, Dak Prescott, Kyle Trask at different stops along the way. Joe Moorhead, current Akron coach, but former Penn State offensive coordinator, is really where he made his name. And Joe Craddock, maybe a name that most people have not heard. He's Tulane's offensive coordinator. The Green Wave right now this season averaging over 40 points per game, 430 yards per game as well. Any of those names get you excited, perk your ears up, or is there a name maybe that we're not talking about that you kind of see and say, you know what, I like that fit?
I think all those names are interesting names. And this is one where you're Michigan. You're going to have pick of the litter. You have all the resources at your disposal. And just because I don't know that it has to be someone that's available. You can look at every power conference offensive coordinator. I mean, Chip Kelly last year jumped from being a head coach in a Power 4 conference at UCLA to the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. So these may be the names to watch early, but I would not be shocked if Michigan went a little bit under the radar and found someone that Sherrone Moore is comfortable with and found someone that could elevate that program and go for it. Go for it all. Go for the big name.
Even Gus Malzahn, I mean, the reason why UCF is targeting Lincoln Riley, or at least interested, because Gus Malzahn stepped down to become Florida State's offensive coordinator. So hell, even forget offensive coordinator, head coach, even we're seeing guys make the jump from smaller head coach to bigger program offensive coordinator. At least of those three, I like Joe Moorhead. Again, maybe a little biased with what he did with Penn State's offense in 2016, 2017. I'm just not sold trip Dan Mullen's coming back. I think he likes TV. I don't know how much you've seen him on ESPN. Like, it looks like he's having a good time criticizing other coaches and not being criticized himself. So I'm not sure if he's racing back to come coach again.
Phil Longo's available. I was just trying to make a smooth transition to our next topic.
You think Luke Fickell would give him a good letter of recommendation?
Yeah, Luke Fickell said the expectation Wisconsin will be more of a pro-style offense that is multiple out of the shotgun, but also able to go under center for what he called 6 to 10 snaps a game. He wants to utilize 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 3 wide receivers, which was a staple of Longo's offense. But he also is keen to use heavier packages, including 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. I think we should just you always hear analysts talk about what's 11 personnel, 12 personnel. This is good for our audience. 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, and potentially 13 personnel. 1 running back, 3 tight ends, 1 receiver, or 21 personnel, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and 1 wide receiver. So, yeah.
Are we going backwards, Trip? That's what it sounds like. Luke Fickell was brought in to change the identity to become a more open offense to compete with the likes of Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. It sounds like now all of a sudden after 2 years, we're going backwards. And actually, you know what we had before, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. Let's get bigger. Let's get more physical. Let's get under center. You know what, Trip? Let's bring the fullback back. Why the hell not?
I think it's a coach who's learning what players are available to his program, and has to find what works in Wisconsin and with the personnel that he has. I like it. That's why I advocated for the other week on the podcast.
You did.
You have to know what you're able. Wisconsin is not going to be able to get talent out of Miami, out of anywhere in the South to get. And who are you competing with in recruiting? You have to build it around the type of players that you can attract, and they can attract some big boys that are going to be physical and win in the trenches, and you can still win in modern. I didn't know that you could. I thought you had to have speed and to go with physicality. You can still win by being really, really committed to your identity and doing it really well. You can still win.
And Michigan last year, right? They're a physical run first team, and they were able to do that. I will admit, I hate giving you credit, but I'll give you credit here. I always held on to the thought that in this new world of college football, NAL, transfer portal, and everything, that you could basically recruit anyone to anywhere. I think you're seeing with Wisconsin, not the case. To your point, it's very tough to get high-level skilled players to carry out the offense you want to execute and have to compete with some of the big boys. I think it's hard to get them to Wisconsin. And I think Luke Fickell, maybe after 2 years, thought it'd be easier than it would, but again, because of the changes in the landscape, and I bought into that. I think you're seeing Wisconsin kind of be maybe the poster child for that. It's still like a lot of the old school rules apply where you highlighted for a while. You got to recruit to what you can get, what's near you. I think Wisconsin tried or at least had the thought that I did of, it's new world, transfer portal. We'll just get anyone to come here. Or we got NAL. We'll pay someone from Florida to come here. Not the case, not that easy. I will give you credit. I think you're right. And I think Wisconsin kind of going back to their roots here is probably smart. And now it's just about maybe refining and changing a few things to become maybe more explosive in the offense that they have. But I will officially wave the white flag in terms of thinking maybe a spread offense at Wisconsin could work. Congratulations, you're right, Trip.
And it's surprising. It's not about being right or wrong, but it is nice to be
Mr.
right.
Humble is here.
Not. The thing they have to worry about right now is they're going to have to hit the portal hard because their defense is being hit hard right now by players going to the transfer portal. A couple of defensive back, and Amari Snowden's a pretty good one too at cornerback that they lost. They had high expectations for, but they're really being impacted by the transfer portal.
I'll give Luke Fickell one thing credit here wise. We talked about it in the National Signing Day rankings. To have a top 25 class for how this season went, first losing season since 2002, I'll give Luke Fickell credit. He was able to keep a lot of commits. They weren't jumping off the ship like the Titanic. To have number 24, I was pretty impressed with Wisconsin being able to still haul in a pretty solid class despite right now not a lot of belief, it seems like, from everyone else around the Wisconsin program, that's for sure. Speaking of lack of belief here, Trip, before we get to the Big Ten title game preview, Ryan Day spoke yesterday. I thought this was really interesting because, right, they are one of the most interesting teams for me going to the playoff just because of how demoralizing that loss to Michigan was and how quickly they would get over it because everything they want to achieve is still right in front of them. Ryan Day yesterday was asked during National Signing Day, basically the state of the program. How are the guys feeling? Is there still a hangover after that Michigan loss? Take a listen to what Ryan Day had to say.
I think there's a mix of emotions there, but I do think as we get closer to finding out who we're playing, there'll be more and more excitement around that. But I think to know that their season isn't over and that the last time they played with each other isn't over and that they still can achieve the goal of winning a national championship certainly is right there. And you know, they are. I think with every day they're getting more and more excited about that. But again, you don't just wake up and say, okay, on to the next thing. It just doesn't work that way. But we're getting there. That's why we're getting on the field today, to get moving around and make sure everybody's together on this thing. And then, you know, that you got to get that first win. You know, in the playoffs, you got to get that first one, and then you just continue to build from there and grow. But I know the seniors are going to do a good job leading here the next couple of weeks.
That concerns me, Trip, to be honest with you, just because like that was said on Wednesday. I get it. You're not going to wake up Sunday morning and say, oh, okay, like all is well and good. But I mean, you're playing a tough team, whether it's Tennessee coming to town, maybe it's Georgia coming to town. Like, you're playing a tough team round number one. I'm a little nervous about where their mentals will be by the time that game is played.
It is December 5th, and the game's not until December 20th or December 21st. I think they'll be okay. If they lose, it's because they're not as good. If they lose, it's going to be because they're not as good, or they perform like they did in the game against Michigan. Not because of what Ryan Day is saying on December 4th.
All right. It's something to monitor. I am fascinated to see.
I'll tell you this. Personal opinion. I think it's a worthwhile discussion. I'm sure they're thinking about it in Columbus. But I can tell that when you're on the radio in the Big Apple, like, we're grasping for stuff here. This is what
we're grasping.
We're grasping for stuff with that.
I think I don't think we're grasping, in part because what did we talk about at this time last week?
You're trying to generate controversy. There's not they need to get over it, but not because of what Ryan Day said this week.
Why it's concerning, at least for me.
You can't let that define their season. There's no doubt about that. But there's still a lot to play for.
That's my point. Everything is still, if they win the national title, this season is a success. It is a massive success. Everything is still right in front of them. And what for me, Ohio State's still one of the most talented teams in the country. And I think they could still win a national title this year. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that can hold them back is Ryan Day's, for lack of a better term, conservativeness, scaredness, worrisome. That's the only reason why they lost to Michigan. They were in their heads. Now, again, it's a Michigan problem. It hasn't happened and showed up against any other team. But if you allow Michigan to snowball into whoever team you're playing, you're going to get run off the field. They have the talent. I just think it's the coaching scared and the mental hurdle they have to clear, and it starts with their head coach. I would have liked to hear a little bit more of, you know what, we're fired up, we're excited. We're licking our wounds. What is that now? 90 hours after the game happened. They've been licking their wounds for 3 years now, 4 years.
It's a catch-22, because if he says the game doesn't bother us, we're just looking forward, then he's getting killed here in Columbus, because the whole thing is beat Michigan. Ohio State has to beat Michigan. So it's a catch-22. He can't win no matter what he says in that situation.
I want to see more confidence. That's all I want to see. I want to see a little bit more confidence. Wow, that's a second. The two biggest eye rolls I've ever seen you give were just in the last 2 minutes. If you're listening to the podcast, I wish you were able to see that. But just you can picture it, I'm sure, here. All right, Trip. We've waited long enough. The one game left on the Big Ten schedule is a few days away. Number 1, Oregon. Number 3, Penn State. Vegas thinks this is a close game here. 3.5-point favorites. The Ducks are. When you look into this, go into this game here, what's the biggest thing you're looking at? What's the biggest key, biggest storyline? We'll let you kind of tee it off here first.
I think it's the speed of Oregon that they have. Ultimately, it's a very dangerous offense with Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, running back James, Gabriel at quarterback. Obviously, this has been the best, most consistent team in college football. I think once they got that offensive line back and healthy early, they've been so good this year. They had one hiccup on the road at Wisconsin, but still found a way to win that game. I think it's their overall team speed, not just on offense, but on defense. Going against the Penn State team, the big story, right? We already addressed it, is they get another opportunity here. No one was expecting them to be in the Big Ten championship because Ohio State had to lose to Michigan. Well, guess what? It happened, and now Penn State has another opportunity for one of those signature wins with both teams already, going to the college football playoff and probably locked into the number 1, number 2, number 5, number 6 seed at worst, right? That's about all you figure. So those are the biggest things that jump out. We can dive further into keys to winning the game, positional matchups, but for me, it's how does Penn State match up with the speed of Oregon, and then from a Penn State perspective, can they get that signature win before the playoffs when you didn't expect to have that opportunity? Meanwhile, for Oregon, you've been the best team all year long. This is about completing a perfect regular season, winning a Big Ten championship, and proving, no doubt, they are the team to beat, the number 1 team and the team to beat going into the college football playoff.
I want to tap into your Penn State knowledge, because when I look at Oregon, I right now, Trip, can't find a hole on their roster. When you highlighted Dylan Gabriel, their ability, by the way, to run the ball consistently in the 9 conference games Oregon played this year, they're second behind only Iowa in rushing yards per game. They're averaging 177 yards on the ground. You highlighted the speed on the outside, the offensive line, but it's not just to the offensive line. They get after the quarterback. They're 6th in the country in terms of sacks with 39. They're top 25 in terms of rushing defense, passing defense. They're top 20 in terms of scoring offense, scoring defense. When I look at this team, Trip, I can't find a hole. When you look at it from Penn State's perspective here, the path to victory, how they get it done, the matchup you think that could maybe go in their favor, where can Penn State make this a game and maybe potentially win this game?
Yeah, I'll start on the offensive side. Number 1, they have to run the ball effectively. Nicholas Singleton has to create some explosive plays in the running game, and Penn State has to be able to establish a running game to stay out of 2nd and 3rd and long situations and stay ahead of the chains. That's when you can get Tyler Warren at his best. He's ultimately going to be the best player on the field in this game. How do you defend him if you're that Oregon defense? And Penn State can do a lot more with Tyler Warren when they're in 2nd and 5s and 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 3s, than they can in 2nd and 10s and 3rd and 10 situations. So I think offensively, it's running the ball effectively and efficiently and maybe creating a big play in the run game. And then the second thing there is protecting Drew Aller on the offensive side. Penn State has been really, really good at keeping Aller upright this year. They've given him time. And when he hasn't, he's done a really good job of extending plays with his legs and making plays with his legs. But Jordan Birch and Mateo Ungalele are as good of defensive ends as Penn State has faced this year. You talked about that Oregon defense, their ability to get after the quarterback. Those are 2 really quick ends. Their 39 sacks are 6th in the country, as you talked about. So I think it's protecting Drew Aller. Flip it around. Those are the 2 keys for the Penn State offense. Let's flip it around for the defensive side. Actually, I'm going to give one more. You have to score touchdowns in the red zone. You got to score touchdowns in the red zone. Flip around the defensive side. Oregon, for all of their talent, when they've gotten into the red zone, Gabriel's turned the ball over, and they have struggled inside the red zone at times this year. So if you can either create turnovers, that's the one flaw on Gabriel, is that he's turned it over in the red zone. If you can create turnovers in the red zone or hold Oregon to field goals, you're going to give yourself a chance to win the game. Now let's talk about Gabriel, right? Outstanding talent. Hasn't really used his legs as much this year. He hasn't needed to. When you're rushing him, and Penn State has the best defensive ends that Oregon's faced all year, conversely here. Abdul Carter, who's playing at an All-American level, he's unbelievable. And then Denai Dennis Sutton, who I think is healthy and playing his best football as well. When you rush Gabriel, you can't get behind him to allow him to step up and escape. You have to stay contained. That doesn't mean you're not trying to get after the quarterback, but you have to stay in your gaps. Gabriel, when you keep him in the pocket and can establish pressure in the pocket, he's listed as 6 foot. I think he's 5'11". He's not the biggest quarterback.
Classic.
He's not the biggest quarterback. So that is where Penn State can have an advantage. And I think the interior D-line, Zane Durant, who was not on one of the 3 all-conference Big Ten teams, which is just laughable. Zane Durant if Oregon, I think their tackles are better than their interior. Marcus Harper might come back on the interior. I'm not sure if that changes much. Josh Connerly and Ajani Cornelius, their tackles are their best offensive linemen. So I think it's Durant against the interior where you get some pressure on the inside. He and Devontae Thomas have played their best football for Penn State. Durant all year, but Thomas now in particular. I think that's where Penn State could have an advantage on the defensive side. So, yeah, there's a path. There's absolutely a path. But Oregon, you can look at, there's things they can exploit here too.
No, you're right about that. And you look at the red zone is fascinating because for how high scoring Oregon's offense is, it is a lot of chunk plays where offensively Oregon just 41st in the country in red zone scoring. Like you said, that is sometimes turnover because of Dylan Gabriel. So he is prone when the field shrinks to put the ball in harm's way. Penn State's defense needs to capitalize. And if Penn State, like you said, you got to score touchdowns in the red zone. That's obvious. Like you talk about that every time. I want to highlight the one other thing you said about the run game for Penn State. I'm with you. You have to be able to run the ball. This has to be a Nick Singleton game. He's not had over 100 yards in a game since week 2 against Bowling Green. This has to be a game where he goes over 100. Control the pace. Put it on your terms. Stay ahead of the chains. Keep that explosive Oregon offense on the side. And we've seen the one area with Oregon's defense is if you get them chasing, you can have success. Go back to that Ohio State game, which is probably the worst game that Oregon's defense has played, at least in terms of points they've given up. Ohio State was able to, at least with Trayvon Henderson, establish the run. They ran for 141 yards in that game, 4.3 yards per carry and 2 rushing touchdowns. That was able to establish balance so that Will Howard had some clean lanes to throw the ball, had some good matchups to get his receivers one-on-one and make plays. He threw for over 300 yards in that game. Obviously, the ending was the way it was, but Ohio State had a lot of success moving the ball because they were balanced. And if you can establish the run here and then allow Drew Aller on second down for play action and allow Omari Evans, who we've seen now in the last few weeks here, make some explosive plays down the field. Harrison Wallace will see if he can play. I saw some videos on social media. He's at least practicing. He missed last week's game against Maryland. He's made some explosive plays as well. And also to free up Tyler Warren, I'm going to assume here, Tosh Lapoy, defensive coordinator for Oregon, is going to have eyes, 3-4 sets of eyes on Tyler Warren every single snap here. It's a lot harder to cover Tyler Warren if you got to worry about Nick Singleton running off, 6 yards of carry here. It absolutely starts with the run game for sure for Penn State. I think it opens up everything else. They want to have some success here, moving the ball against the Ducks.
Did we just cover it all in 5 minutes? That was pretty good. Ultimately, you can talk about matchups here, matchup there, matchup here, matchup there. Whoever creates more, it's such a coach speak thing. But in a game between two teams like this, I think it's, we're trying to learn how Penn State stacks up with the speed of Oregon, a team that's been considered the elite team all year. And many people have pointed to Penn State and said, well, who have you played? What have you done? You lost your one game against Ohio State at home, but they didn't convert in the red zone, right? In that game, it sounds like such coach speak, but in a game like this, where there's star players on each side, it's going to come down to red zone efficiency, turnovers, explosive plays. It sounds so cliche, but ultimately to me, that's what this game comes down to. Who can create those plays? And your best players have to be your best players in big games.
Before we give a pick, I'm just curious here. We talked about a little bit on Monday. Who do you think needs to win more here? Oregon going for the perfect regular season and trying to cement, themselves as the team to be in the Big Ten. We've talked about Penn State's inability to win big games. Forget about just the 1 seed and the 5 seed for a second here, Trip. Who do you think this win would mean more for?
I think it would mean more for Penn State to finally get that narrative and shift that narrative and then not have that hanging over you going into the college football playoff. And then the long-term benefits of Big Ten champions. We beat the number 1 team. And for Penn State to ascend to the number 1 spot, right? They'd be number 1 for the first time in more than 2 decades. That would be huge for their program.
I agree. And I think it just, like I said, lifts a weight off. I think it gives you more confidence, even if that second round matchup is more difficult. I think you're more fearless as a Penn State player, coach, fan versus Oregon. Oregon doesn't need confidence. If they lose, okay, they lost to the number 3 team in the country. You're going to have a home playoff game. I think there's no doubt about Oregon's chances to win a national title. I think Penn State can really give themselves a boost if they win. And I think there are questions about Penn State's ability to beat a good team in the postseason if they do lose this game. One thing I've noticed, Trip, on social media recently, James Franklin feels a little bit more feisty. I like it. I love it. It feels like there's a different James Franklin this year. I know we've talked about in previous podcasts as well about, maybe some of the mental toughness that Penn State's had compared to previous years, it being better and why they're able to come back in a few games that maybe in different years they lose. Is there a sense, do you get a sense being around him that there's maybe a different demeanor with Franklin this year?
I haven't noticed a change because I think he's always been a personable guy for those that have been around him. I think in how he deals with fans and media, it's shifted a little bit. I think it's a fair observation. I think he's more confident in himself. I think, and a coach that's displaying that also is probably more confident because he trusts his team. And I think the team's got a little bit more swagger than they've had in the past. I think it's a fair observation. Being around him, he's always been a guy who's got a big personality. His players rave about his personality and his ability to connect with them, kind of like a corny dad sometimes, but also fiery in the locker room. But I think he's letting the public see it more, which I think is a great thing because he unfairly, I think, sometimes gets criticized because he is so calculated. He is so routine, and people see it as people, I think, see it as disingenuous. But I think he truly is a genuine guy. And now you're seeing like the real James Franklin, and that's probably because he's more confident with what his team does, but then also with what he has around him with his athletic director and university president that he's talked about so much with that relationship and synergy.
Why I ask is because, we played early in the year the video and the audio of him dropping an F-bomb on the broadcast with you at halftime about the officiating. And then even there's a social media video going around over the weekend where there's a Penn State fan who's basically like, all right, James, we'll see you in Indy. This was after Ohio State lost to Michigan right before the team's about to run out of the tunnel to face Maryland. And he's basically like, shut up, sit down. We're locked in on Maryland. Focus up and let's go. I love that. I absolutely love that. I've not seen that. I feel like you're around him clearly a lot more than I am. You never really see the public feistiness, the fireness of who cares about, the Big Ten title game. We right now have to focus on Maryland. He's not afraid to kind of go back and forth with the fans. I like it. I think it's endearing. I think it's a good sign of the intensity that you have to have here, kind of break through and shows you highlights where the focus is for sure. All right, Chip, let's put you on the spot here. Wrap up this pod with an official Big Ten championship prediction. Oregon, again, 3.5-point favorites over Penn State. When it's all said and done, Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, CBS, who is lifting the Big Ten championship trophy?
Penn State, 23-20.
I hope you're right. I'll take Oregon, 31-21. I think Oregon is just too good. I think their speed is too much. I think Penn State can make it a game. I would take losing by 10. I think it's still a good showing from the Nittany Lions. I just right now, until they show it, until they prove it in a big game, I just can't go against Oregon. I think they're the best team, the most consistent team. Still my pick to win the national title. I think they prove it on Saturday in Indy. And obviously we'll see how far Penn State does fall in that game where they're seated, which brings us to Monday's pod, because we got a very fun podcast here for you, where obviously we'll have the Big Ten championship game reaction with Trip live in Indy this weekend. We'll have the rankings and the seedings. We'll get to actually talk for the first time, Trip, real playoff matchups. Who's hosting who's going where in the case of Indiana, who's got the bye. I'm excited for Saturday night for the game. I am already excited for Sunday, noon Eastern. Give us the rankings. Tell us who's playing who. Tell us who's playing where. And let's go. Let's go.
And then we can still have at least 4 more weeks of college football this season. No, it's wrapping up. We're at conference championship weekend. We still got a month and a half of college football. So plenty of good stuff. Plenty of good stuff to come.
Which means plenty of good pods also coming your way. So make sure you're subscribing, YouTube, wherever you get your pods. We are the title, Still Enrolled. If you want to ask us a question, stillenrolledpodcast@gmail.com. If you're going to Indy as an Oregon or a Penn State fan, look for Trip on the sideline, give him a shout. And with that, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy, if you're a Penn State-Oregon fan, the game. If you're a non-fan, just enjoy the Big Ten title game in general. We'll be back to break it all down Monday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.